Another month, another batch of weapon refines. And oh boy, do these get longer and longer. Not on the scale of Nyla, but let's talk.
Let the lesson begin.
What's up guys, Akariss here, bringing you another Fire Emblem Heroes video. Today is, as expected, the weapon refine video featuring the brand new 6 weapon refines of the new year. Okay, these ones are definitely interesting and we're talking about, so as always, here I am providing you guys with the content you need and information, the theory behind everything to understand where these units lie and how good they are. Now, around the remix time, I'll likely release another updated video featuring where I feel Eirika and Lucina lie in standings of like tiers and whatnot, like rankings and whatnot. So I will probably talk about it here and you'll get the idea of what I think about them, but generally speaking, I'm going to wait for another video to update my thoughts and rankings on those. What I want to actually emphasize at the beginning of this video, because I always do a little bit of an intro, is a lot of these videos on YouTube have a sort of like lecture type of style where you guys just get a lot of information, try to digest it, and then hopefully apply it in some way. And I think that's what's lacking is application and practical usage of a lot of these videos. I know a lot of people digest this content and some of you definitely can put it to good use, but on the other hand, I have tons of people who also give me feedback where it's like they're just copy pasting builds or they're not getting like the full picture on how to use a lot of these characters or even the team comps they're supposed to be in. Which is why I would recommend you probably check out my Twitch channel and watch some streams where I'm actually using some of these characters or characters I've featured in the past in actual gameplay, whether it's Arena or Aether Raids or Arena Assault or whatever, and kind of get the idea of how to use those characters or where they fit in and what you can actually do with them. There's only so much information and so much work that I put into these videos, and it's quite a lot to try to understand, to get you guys the information, the baby steps you need to get going, but you got to actually put it into practice if you actually care about or like these characters. So yeah, that's my intro here. Take the theory, put it into practice. That's how you get the full experience in this very, very complicated, and it just keeps feeling more and more complicated every single patch. We are Yu-Gi-Oh boys. These texts get longer. How do you apply them properly? I'm still here trying to get you guys informed. Now, normally at the end of the video, I ask you to smash the like button and whatnot. I'm still going to do that. Smash the like button and sub, okay? But one other thing is, if you actually appreciate all this effort I do, and it is quite a lot, then maybe deeply consider the Patreon in the description below and consider the price of like a McDouble to give back and show what I do here, because there's only so much time and effort in a day with our busy lives for me to put this together. So I wanted to throw that out there. I'm not going to say it at the end, I'll say it here. And that's it. Let's talk about the weapon refines of this month. So, Legendary Eirika to start. I'm kind of sad, just to give my own personal opinion on this. I foddered her long ago for attack speed solo. I regret that in this moment. And I'm also playing through Sacred Stones right now, so I kind of appreciate Eirika a bit more, unfortunately for me. But yeah, here we are. So Eirika fans, if you're an Eirika fan, this is obviously a good refine, and she is in a much better spot. I covered her Lunar Brace in the update noted video I did a couple of days ago. That, if you don't remember, that's just Canto 2, and true damage on every hit based on the 15% of the opponent's defense. Similar to what like Lunar Arc does, Lunar Flash from Legendary Alm, but on a melee scale. This is actually quite good. I didn't mention it then. So it doesn't rely on a special, because you can use stuff like Gale Force on her, and that's really good because you don't have to like feel bad that you're not using Lunar Blaze effectively. So she stands out a bit as a potential Gale Force unit. Her stat spread's actually still okay for like a 2022 unit, having really good speed. A little bit lacking on attack, but definitely makes up for it with the extra stats she gets from her weapon refine, and of course the true damage from her B skill. So she's in a pretty solid spot. Her weapon refine is an initiation or solo clause, both pretty easy to accomplish, 4 to all stats, and I'm gonna say like a special fighter type effect here on the base. So it's like every single engagement, whether it's her or her foe, is gonna accelerate special by 2, which is really good. The thing lacking, of course, is that she doesn't have a slaying weapon, but it's fine. It's not that big of a deal. She also comes with speed damage reduction, which I believe on calves is only found on Brave Elwood besides her. So I'm probably missing someone. I pretty much always miss someone, but for the most part, that's only what comes to mind. So damage reduction, speed damage reduction on calves, still really good. And since she gets 8 tall stats, she can actually act as a solid tank option as well with Canto. And for calves, that's pretty rare. But yeah, let's jump into some builds to start this off. And we're going to talk about Arena, where you should likely be saving to use her. And of course, Air Offense, where she definitely can be a stellar option in Water Season. So when it comes to Arena, it goes without saying that she's going to be a very highly mobile unit. And the thing I don't like about her is that she doesn't have the anti-guard or anti-acceleration type of effect on her weapon, unfortunately, or her B skill. And that is the big difference between her and her brother. So unfortunately, when you run into Special Fighter or guard like type effects, she's going to whiff her Gale Force. That kind of sucks. But she still makes up for it by having Canto and True Damage, which is really good, and damage reduction on top of that. So she's not too bad still. No follow-up is something I forgot to mention that's also on her B skill, and that is really powerful, as opposed to like an auto double from Legendary Ephraim. A lot of comparisons here, but mostly speaking, they do have different roles, and I do think she's still quite good, especially as an arena unit. In Water Season, she's going to be totally fine to use now. Before this Refine and B skill update, obviously that would have been a struggle, but she scores really well with our dual cav. For if you happen to have it, she has high mobility, she's fine in that season, and being red is actually pretty good against Legendary Byleth, who you will see quite a bit. She's going to struggle, I'd say, a little bit against some of the other blue threats, such as Dimitri and obviously Legendary Crom, but it's still okay because she's still pretty fast, and True Damage will cut through some of their defenses, but it's not super comfortable, but she can still work within that season as long as you back her up with some green support. Finally, in Air Offense, I do think she's quite good as well as an option, and thanks to Fury Seal, she actually, for those of you that don't have her merged, she can work pretty well as a Wings of Mercy enabler. She doesn't take too much damage on initiation because of her Storm Siglinde having damage reduction. She gets a bunch of in-combat stats, and because you can just run double Fury on Fury 3 or Fury 4 with Fury Seal, you pretty much can enable Wings of Mercy easily, Canto in and out, get danced, and go back in, and it's really good. She can do this really well. It's like especially in light season, she could act as like a Regan, so to speak. In Azure season, she competes with Regan, which is unfortunate, but you can still always have like 2 red calves doing this, and she does have true damage, so again, really does stand out in that respect. Finally, if you hadn't already noticed, because she has Special Fighter on her weapon, on both phases, and it's just a solo condition, pretty easy to accomplish, plus speed damage reduction and no follow-up in her B skill plus true damage, she actually can work as a tank too. Just so you don't end up screwing over her A skill with like a distant counter or something, you can honestly just use a far safe tank. Now, when I said Special Fighter, I didn't mean the guard effect applied to your opponent. That isn't there, so keep that in mind, and that's why something like Kestrel Stance 3 is still a good A skill. Or you could use her attack speed solo 4, that also works. But yeah, she can work as a tank, and that's why I'm featuring that as an option, with far save or even distant counter, distant stance skills as well. But I do like combining save skills now with different tanks based on whether a character is melee or ranged. So yeah, Eirika fans definitely leveled up from here. She's just better at what she did. Well, actually, she's kind of redesigned. She is a high mobility, flexible type of unit, either where you're tanking, engaging. You could even swap out her B skill for Wings of Mercy and rely just on her weapon for getting some engagements that way off of someone else enabling Wings of Mercy through chip damage or whatnot. She's very flexible, and I could honestly talk about her way more and feature more builds. But then we'd be here forever, so let's actually move on and talk about some of the other characters. Next up is Lucina. Now, I was totally scared of this one for a while, seeing what they do with the Refine and Weapon and the not the B skill, but Future Vision. Thankfully, Future Vision ends up being sort of snag effect, attack, defense, snag, so it's not too crazy or anything like that. Keeps pretty much the same effect, but they decided to enhance the base effect here and of course Refine. Her stat spread is actually outdated. Attack speed 34-35 just doesn't really cut it in this day and age, but of course, as with all weapons, you pretty much have your 4 to all stats. You have the snag effect from Future Vision 2, and she is now completely unique by not only having Future Vision, which provides some sort of mobility, but she actually has an auto double like buff. Like, this is not in the game besides her yet, so she literally auto double buffs herself and whoever she Future Visions with. That is really cool as a support unit. I already thought she was like amazing as a support unit, but now she's even better because you can just make characters who have no business auto doubling auto double. So you could do something stupid like Fallen Edelgard with Bold Fighter, with Future Vision, Lucina, making Fallen Edelgard take away her Worry Fighter effect, and then just use Bold Fighter plus Lucina's Future Vision effect, and create this idea where like Fallen Edelgard can now double stuff, which is kind of interesting, for sure. But there's way more characters that obviously can do this. I just use Fallen Edelgard as one example of a unit who usually has no business doing doubles, but that is something that Legendary Lucina can enable. Her weapon refine is pretty tame, all things considered. It's pretty much just a, I guess we'll call it the Grima effect, or Pledgian effect, I guess, where you're just pretty much enhancing her stats or debuffing foes and whatnot, and just getting better. It's just like closing the stat gap. I'm not really going to explain that one. It's on tons of weapons. One thing I want to show here, guys, is something cool you can do with Legendary Lucina and Future Vision. As you'll see in the screenshot over there. Now, I don't have Legendary Lucina, so you'll have to use a bit of imagination, but if you are playing in Light Season, you can actually assume Uller uses Future Vision on someone like Ashe here. Instead of smiting with like another character, usually you'd have to like smite on units on like teams that have high range. You could actually Future Vision here onto someone like Ashe, and because of Ashe's Guidance 4 effect, Legendary Lucina could actually engage in 2 spaces forward of where Ashe is, and from her starting position, she can pretty much engage on Corrin right in that situation. On top of that, Peony would likely follow up with a dance. Now, due to traps and other complications, this won't be super consistent, but Lucina can act pretty awesomely, can interact pretty well with these sort of like Guidance 4 effects. Obviously combining with like some Urtana and Ashe and maybe any other future maybe Guidance 4 type effects that we might have. So I wanted to show that because obviously in the builds as we're about to look at, she can function as a Wings of Mercy enabler. Shocker, right? For no one here to see this. So yeah. Future Vision with Fury combined right there on the build to my farthest right, you'll see that yes, she pretty much can just Future Vision, and with someone like Ashe can get into a position where she engages on the enemy team, and that doesn't use any actions. You don't have to smite, so you could use the rest of your team with Wings of Mercy to follow up and sweep a team. If you don't really know what I'm saying here, and I don't blame you, again, check out the Twitch streams, or I'm going to be uploading another video soon with some more Aether Raids commentary where I kind of do this with different units. Not Lucina, because I don't have Lucina, but in concept, this would work. Another cool thing to realize is because her Future Vision does give her an auto double effect, she can use Wind Sweep now and pretty much still double through her Wind Sweep, denying this auto double effect. They effectively just cancel each other. Like Wind Sweep says no to auto double, and her Future Vision says yes to auto double, so they just cancel out, and she can double like naturally, which is pretty cool. One thing to notice though and realize is, of course, if she's slower than some units and she uses Wind Sweep, she's not going to be able to double, nor will she be able to sweep. So be cautious. Wind Sweep isn't always the best option, but it's definitely pretty good as an anti-meta choice. And as you can tell by the build on the left there, yes, I do believe she's a solid like second best win legendary. Maybe Legendary Micaiah is potentially better. I've been using her as well, Legendary Micaiah, on my account, and have been impressed. But I do think the absolute mobility and flexibility that Legendary Lucina provides is outstanding even in 2022. Her weapon obviously puts her in a far more competitive spot. So if you really, really, really wanted to use Lucina, you should consider potentially sparking on the Legendary remixes and building her up. Her one weakness, of course, is the Dual Infantry 4. And that only brings her at a 175 scoring, which is pretty low by today's standards, but that she really does make up for it. with the amount of coolness that this unit now provides for sure. Unfortunately, nobody's going to dethrone Legendary Sigurd, and it doesn't start here. Sorry, it's just not happening. However, if you wanted to use her as well in a different way, if you had merges or whatnot, she can work pretty well on defense now and offense, where with Future Vision, she's not only providing like auto double support to a lot of units on defense, who again should have no business doing it, but also on offense, supporting others not only for mobility reasons, but again, providing this auto double effect and good nuker support. I think she's really cool and definitely upgraded quite a bit. There's nothing super specifically different from before that she wasn't already doing besides that auto double effect. You could have done a lot of this even before, but she's just a lot better at doing it. And the auto double just creates these all cool support partners you could do. And honestly, if you have some ideas for that, just share them in the comments. I'd love to read them. But yeah, let's move on because there's still quite a bit to talk about here. So next up is Canas, and I'm sure many of you have been waiting for this one for quite a while. I don't blame you, since he feels like he got denied like 2 times. But his weapon is here, and it's honestly pretty good. However, Canas' stat spread is complete and utter what I would call doo-doo. 32 attack, 29 speed, even the 33 res isn't amazing by today's standards, but the weapon is gonna make up for that. And the thing about his weapon is it's fairly flexible and pretty unique, which is what you need to stand out for weapon refines in this day and age. So with pretty simple conditions, 3 spaces is pretty generous for an ally condition, and the other one is foe's HP 75%, he can pretty much get 10 attack and 10 res. That brings him closer to today's standards, but the real icing on the cake here is going to be the 20% true damage, whether it's 20% of his res or the enemy res, whoever has higher. On top of that, the unique effect here is a sort of self-pulse effect every turn. And this is really cool for a couple of reasons. First of all, he doesn't require his team to set him up. Pretty good. Second reason is he isn't totally weak to some pulse tie effects that will likely hit him. So you might run into something like odd pulse tie on defense, which you may not think is that good, but if you think about it, something like Regan and Ascend of Fjorm really get hurt by stuff like odd pulse tie, whereas Canas would not, because you probably won't have his special ready on turn 1, or even well, you should have it ready by turn 3, but by then you've probably engaged right on turn 3 or on turn 2, depending on what sort of build or whatnot you use. So he's not really weak to certain things, and he actually fits right into the meta how you would want him to. Now, here's what I suggest with Canas that I think is really nice to consider, which is, as you've noticed on the 2 builds on the right here, are AoE builds. Now, he is a red unit against a very prominent green tank, which is Ascend of Fjorm. Ascend of Fjorm, believe it or not, is very weak to AoE specials because of her... Well, first of all, most Ascend of Fjorms do not stack res, so if you stack enough attack, then he's going to, like someone like this red unit is going to do quite a bit of AoE damage, and then also because he's red, is going to do weapon triangle advantage damage in combat. Another thing to realize here is that this true damage, 20% of the res, is also out of combat. It applies to the AoE, so he's going to be able to do that AoE damage out of combat through the AoE, and then in combat as well. Of course, the refine effect, which foes HP 75%, grants attack res 5 to unit, that would be turned off due to AoE, but the true damage effect on the AoE plus still a little bit in combat is going to make up for the fact that he's like missing out on 5 attack and 5 res. It's not that big of a deal. What is cool here to think about is AoE specials on offense. Like if you use Canas on offense, you can pretty much AoE exactly how you would want to hit a far save tank. If you didn't already know, far save tanks can avoid AoE if positioned certain ways. Like for example, Blazing Flame is a horizontal AoE. If the far save tank is obviously vertical or diagonal, they don't get hit by that AoE because the AoE happens and then they come and far save in. Now, as a user of AoE, you can obviously manipulate who you want to nuke and therefore hit the far save tank. This is obviously harder on defense, as people who know how AoE and far save mechanics work can avoid that AoE, and therefore Canas is going to be less good. However, he's still going to be pretty solid because he should be running something like Guard, where he'll still really annoy Fjorm users. So if you want your Ascended Fjorm counter, Canas may not exactly kill most Ascended Fjorms, especially if you use them on defense, but he will definitely kill them on offense and will kill a lot of other things due to the way the AoE mechanic works here. And if you didn't realize already, 50 res is pretty much 10 AoE damage out of combat from the 10 AoE, and then it's going to be about like 5, 6 or so in combat, because he is of course missing out on the secondary refine effect, which is still really strong additional damage. And because he doesn't want to run your traditional life and death stuff, you can without a doubt just use Fury, which is pretty good. You could even use Desperation. You could use Times Pulse, depending on whether you want to accelerate him a bit faster with that AoE, or with Infantry Pulse support instead. His builds are really flexible, and you really can do a lot with him. Low attack res might seem like it's kind of anti-synergistic with like the Ancient Codex by like making your opponent's res lower, and therefore he does less true damage, but realistically he should be the one with the higher res stat, and that is far more consistent than trying to hope that your opponent has more res than he does. Just have the high res and know exactly how much damage you're doing. Whew, that's a doozy. But yeah, if you do use him in Arena, he's actually pretty solid as a traditional mage tank, and because he's red as a mage tank, he has a pretty solid matchup against Legendary Byleth in Water Season. He's also going to do decent damage against Chrom and Dimitri, who you'll also see, so Water's not too bad for him if you plan to use him there. Overall, Canas is a solid unit, and it stands out quite a bit. This is only one way that I see him being used, quite a good one, and I'm sure there's many Canas fans I can add to it. Again, comments below. But yeah, let's move on to the next one. So the next guy on our list is not someone I can really hype up as much. Now, if there's a loser of the batch, it's probably Silas. Silas's refine and weapon is just not that impressive. It's still decent, I guess, and most refines to this day are going to be decent, I guess, but it's not that impressive. And the reason this one doesn't stand out is because it just doesn't have any utility or any sort of unique aspect to it compared to a lot of the other refines we talk about where I feel they're pretty cool. Some sort of mechanic, Kanto, auto double support, you know, like true damage, whatever, a pulsing yourself every turn. Like, these are really unique mechanics that make the unit stand out, and I guess they just ran out of design space for Mr. Silas here because honestly it's just not interesting. He's pretty much got a auto double denial, hooray, and then a bunch of attack and defense as long as he's within range of his support partner, okay, I guess, and effective against armor as a weapon. Again, it's not that interesting. Just having stats and focus on attack and defense just isn't going to really make you stand out, and therefore the best way to use them is probably just some sort of bulky unit who can not take physical damage, I guess. That's really all it is. Him being a cav is an advantage, so of course you can just use near trace. You can probably stack his speed enough to make him fast enough to heavy blade, and he's gonna have enough attack to do that, I guess. So heavy blade in and out, trace with gale force, a little bit of mobility is always great, but he's not really the best at that role, unfortunately. If you combine his really good defensive bulk and he's usually taking physical damage, he won't actually take too much physical damage. If you combine him with steady posture, his auto double denial is still pretty good, and then he needs his own auto double, so quick riposte ends up being pretty good there, especially if an enemy has some sort of impact effect. So yeah, it's okay. I mean, I'm not overly impressed. He can work with some far save tanks, but it's not that interesting. Finally, if you do end up using him as a solo tank with distant counter, distant stance, yeah, there's really not much to talk about with Silas. Like, he's usable, obviously, more than pre-refine, but this one is just not going to do much, and there's not really much to talk about here. Tank with him, high physical bulk, hooray. But yeah, let's move on to someone else. Next up on our list are the Corrins. Now, there's a little bit of interesting things to note about the Corrins here, and yeah, there's both of them there. They're pretty much the same, with female Corrin obviously having less attack, a little bit more speed, and I believe the female Corrin has a lot, like slightly better res. It's really, they're pretty much the same unit at the end of the day, but just with different matchups because one is green and one is blue. Because we got a free ephemera manual of Dream female Corrin, and that because of that, maybe more of you have potentially this merged. Therefore, I'm gonna talk more about female Corrin than male, but at the same, like they're pretty much the same in how you would use them. Builds would be identical, just matchups would be slightly different. Okay, so what's cool about this weapon is just the amount of effects it has. It's a slaying weapon, it has damage reduction on the first hit, and then on top of that, it has 8 to all stats with breath built in. That's a lot of stuff. One thing, if you hadn't realized already, is that the Dream Corrins are actually like the last units before the dragon flower like cutoff happens. And if you don't know what I mean by this, I'll just show you the builds right now. It's that they have access to 20 flowers, and they're the highest stat units before effectively the next set of units only have access to 15 flowers, 10 flowers, 5 flowers, etc. based on when they came out. And the Dream Corrins were 167, 168 before merge in stat totals. Just for perspective, the latest units, such as Ash, Ninja Shamir, are 182. This means that if you consider the flower usage, these units have just as much stats as current units, which means they are competitive in stat totals with the most recent releases. Now, if you consider how much effects are in their weapons and how much bonus stats they also get, they are as good as recent released units because they literally have damage reduction, a breath effect, and slaying in their weapon. That is incredible. So if you are a Dream Corrin user, then you should be pretty happy about that. They are just as good as recent release units. Now, in terms of usage, I actually am a fan of dragons in the current meta. They're pretty good. I'm using Legendary Tiki myself. I know a lot of people as well that use stuff like Noe and even Fae with success, and they are good in the current meta because most people would be running stuff like Windsweep. That means that obviously dragons don't care about Windsweep, and they stand out because of that. Another thing that's really interesting to realize about these Corrins is they kind of mimic the same playstyle as Legendary Corrin by having damage reduction, you know, kind of like what Negating Fang is, and breath as well. So it's kind of interesting that the weapon mimics Legendary Corrin quite a bit, but they also have damage reduction, which is a great thing to have that isn't tied to the special. That opens up their specials to use stuff like Bonfire and Iceberg. It does make them weak, unfortunately, to like Deadeye and Piercing type effects. You know, like Lift is still going to be a problem, of course. But you don't necessarily have to use them as range tanks because their weapon doesn't have any sort of distant counter effect, so why not combine them with a far save tank and focus strictly on melee combat. And they definitely do a good job there because they have great bulk, great attack, great speed. They just have a bunch of stats and a bunch of effects that make them really solid. Very flexible units, can run a huge variety of builds. Any of the dragon skills are open to them. Dragon's Ire, Wall, Wrath, all fine, but I do think because they are obviously infantry, null follow-up with their high speed stat ends up being probably the best thing to use. I can't stress this enough, but even some of these older units are extremely viable, and new unit releases don't necessarily outclass stuff like this. When you have these older units invested, if you were literally summoning for these characters years ago, you can dig them out of your barracks and they are just as good and just as viable as recent releases. And that is definitely one reason to save your orbs and not feel compelled to be summoning on every banner, thinking that you have to chase the latest toy, because this is really good. Okay, whew. Let's move on. So, finally, to end off our Weapon Refined batch, we have Halloween Myrrh. Now, this one's hard to talk about for a couple of reasons. As someone who uses an armored dragon in Nerd Season, and I'm talking specifically about Legendary Tiki, one big difference between Myrrh and Tiki is that Tiki has a speed stat. Of course, she's blue, she has dragon effectiveness, and she doesn't have that much competition. In fact, I can't even think about any other, I don't think there are any blue dragon armors besides Tiki. I could be totally wrong on that, and somebody in comments will correct me. Fine. Myrrh unfortunately does. Myrrh has competition with the Athuns. And I'm talking about, of course, Binding Blade, just standard OG Athun, and Spring Athun, the duo unit. Those Athuns are still really good and still pretty competitive as carry units, and someone like Original Athun will likely get a refine fairly soon. She is a book 3 unit, so that should be coming, and that's where I feel like Myrrh is kind of like in trouble when it comes to competition there. Now, don't get me wrong, this refine and weapon is still good, and she's in a much better spot, but there is another problem here, and that is the lack of penalty negation, and of course no speed means that she's going to be very weak to no follow-up effects, but also it's just no slaying weapon. And that no slaying weapon really limits the specials you can use on someone like Myrrh, and of course Tiki as a dragon. This weakness obviously applies to a lot of other dragons because they can't use stuff like Ruptured Sky and are limited to like Moonbow, Glimmer, Noontime combined with Breath, because you really want to fire off those specials in every combat as opposed to like Aether, which is like too inconsistent to really get a lot of value out of. But anyways, there is still going to obviously be a couple of ways to use Halloween Myrrh that I could see being good. Her weapon, if you don't already know, is just going to give her a bunch of attack, debuff enemy attack, make her bulkier, give her an auto double, have the second hit damage reduction similar to Brave Edelgard. I think I covered everything there, but yeah, it's not too bad. So one really good way to use her, I think the best way to use her, is actually the first build called Spooky DR, and that's pretty much using Hardy Fighter to deny enemy auto doubles, and she gets her own auto double through her weapon. She wants to be near save so that she can take advantage of attack speed unity in the A skill to not be completely weak to debuffs. And unfortunately, one of her biggest weaknesses, of course, is no follow-up, so you do want her to actually have a speed stat so she can be competitive against other units who try to deny her double. She's not always going to win those like checks and whatnot, but this is still, in my opinion, one of the better ways to use her. If you use damage reduction combined with Hardy Fighter Escutcheon with her refine effect, then you don't really need to be stacking bulk, because a lot of that damage reduction is going to come from her special, Hardy Fighter's effect, and of course her weapon. So really, bulk isn't so crucial, and you can be free to stack attack and speed instead, and attack speed unity definitely takes care of her weaknesses. That build, in my opinion, is the best way to use Myrrh, similar to like Ascended Fjorm. Ascended Fjorm wants to stack offensive stats. Doesn't really matter how much defense and res she has, because a lot of her weaknesses are covered through Ice Mirror instead. Same application with Myrrh, and I think Hardy Fighter plus obviously Darting Breath with attack speed unity is her best build, for sure, hands down. Now, the other two builds are more of your standard stuff, which is pretty much stacking bulk with using, I mean, that second build there should probably have a defense IV, but it could be a res or attack one as well. Effectively stacking bulk through standard stuff like Sturdy Stance, Near Save. Slick Fighter, you might think is a little bit weird because she already has auto double on her weapon, but that is actually pretty good because if you run into a foe who has an impact weapon, then with Slick Fighter, she's going to still get her double off no problem because there's 2 layers of auto double on her. That might seem complicated, but there's only one auto double denial through an impact, and then she gets 2 auto doubles. One cancels out one, and therefore she gets her double. So it doesn't have to rely on her speed. However, both the builds featured on the middle and right are weak to no follow-up, which is why that's called Please No Follow-Up, because yeah, she's unfortunately going to get wrecked there. Slick Fighter is still super strong though, because it denies her from her weakness of no penalty negation. And you really do want that there, regardless. So yeah, I do think Myrrh is a solid like tank candidate for you guys who are Myrrh fans or possibly format her, but Hardy Fighter is 100% going to be her best build, and I could see her being really good for that reason alone. Just keep her away from Brave Alm. That might hurt quite a bit. She might still kill him back, but it would definitely hurt quite a bit. So yeah, guys, that pretty much covers this batch of Weapon Refines, another long and hopefully tons of information for you guys in this video. I hope you did enjoy it as always, and yeah, if you want to put this to practice, you want to actually see what I'm talking about with a lot of these builds and where I get these ideas from, then maybe consider hitting up the Twitch stream, checking that out, saying hi if nothing else, and I will be back tomorrow for the Should You Pull video for the new banner, If you're summoning day 1, then that video probably doesn't matter to you, but if nothing else, maybe the analysis on Joshua might, because he is a fairly interesting unit. Not Yuri caliber, but still pretty interesting. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Smash the like button and sub. I'll see you guys very, very soon. Much love. Peace.
It's over.